Hey everyone, and welcome to a new tutorial. Today I'm going to show you how to do snow cover through a couple of simple nodes in Unreal. Now this does rely on you having a little bit of knowledge in the material editor, so if you have some trouble, I'm sorry, but you're going to have to do a little bit of backwards and forwardsing to try and keep up. Okay, so here's what we're doing. As you can see here, we've got the standard high-rise. What I've done though is I've incorporated a new node that if I was to get this, I'm actually able to slowly creep in snow cover across the entire map. And as you can see, as the snow cover comes in, it actually fills in the cracks of some materials first. So early snow cover fills in the cracks of this metal. And if I was to go to the tops of these surfaces, you can see that the snow's just starting to kind of trickle in. And then as I turn it up, you're really getting blanket snow cover across a lot of stuff. Now the cool part of all of this is that it's actually only a couple of materials to get going. Only a couple of material nodes to really incorporate once you've done the initial grunt work. So if I was to pull out a material and actually take a look at it, metal tiled for instance, all I've actually added to this material, this is their default material, all I've actually added is this little node and this one. So this is typically where the material would end. I've just created a new node called material function underscore cover in snow, and that literally just that adds all of the snow functionality to it. It's a nice blanket setup, and then all of this for each material is just tied into a simple material collection, parameter collection asset that can control. At the moment, there's only 2 parameters, but we could theoretically set it up for more. So at the moment you've got snow cover, so if I wanted to make the snow like a whiter snow, I could push it that way. If I wanted it to be bluer, I could push it that way. And you can see that it modifies every material uniformly, which is a really nice little effect. And it's a good way to get some consistency in your world with an interesting thing. So to begin with, this is actually made up of 3 real elements. You've got a material function, which is used to mask between the base material and the snow cover. You've got the material layer of the snow, which is literally just something that looks like snow. I'll show you how to set up something that's reasonable there. And then of course that last part, which is the material parameter collection. So I'll walk you through these one at a time. Okay, so to begin with, we're going to go off and create a folder for us to actually work from. I'm just going to right click in your folder and I'm just going to call this one material functions. Cool. The material functions, we're going to start by initially creating the material parameter collection, which I'm going to call terrain setup, because eventually you could actually expand this to be things well beyond the scope of just ice. So I'm going to create a scalar value, which is going to control the snow figure. So I'm going to call this a snow amount. I'm going to set that to 1 by default. So once we start using it, everything will be covered in snow. And this one here is going to be called snow color. Cool. And with that in mind, let's set these values here to be 0.8, probably 0.85, 0.9. Maybe. That looks kind of nice. Okay, gonna hit save, and then we're gonna forget about this until later on when we need to use it. Now the next thing I'm gonna do is I'm gonna right click and I'm gonna create a material function. Now we're gonna use material functions in 2 different ways here. One is to create what we call a material layer, which is essentially just a material function, but it ends up giving us a specific, basically a material. And the other one is going to be a function that is going to be used to blend 2 material layers together. So the first one we're going to create is going to be the actual cover in snow material function. So because I'm all inventive like that, I'm going to call it mf for material function underscore cover in snow, and we're going to open that up and start working on this one. So initially we need to focus on a couple of things. We know there's going to be a blend. We know that blend is going to need to account for height because we really want to fill in the cracks and stuff whenever it starts snowing. And we know there's going to be 2 materials that are being blended together, which means to begin with we really want to output a we really want to start by actually getting two material layers. So I'm going to go make material attributes, and I'm going to click on it and hit Control W to duplicate it. Now, this bottom one is eventually going to be replaced with the actual snow material. But the top one for the time being is going to be a couple of dummy values that we use for the sake of having something in there for us to assess how it's actually going. So this isn't going to be a real base material, it'll just be a pure black. So we'll be able to see the white snow on black and that everything's working well. So to begin with, we're going to just plug some values in on this. I'm going to set the base color to be 0. I'm going to set the roughness to be 1. Now for anyone that's curious as to how I'm just adding scalar nodes, I'm just holding down 1 and left clicking. It's a nice little thing to get used to. By default, the opacity is going to be 1. Normally you wouldn't have to account for that, but because we'll be using subsurface scattering, it's going to have to get taken into account. That's probably about it for the time being. This is then going to feed into a function input, and the function input is going to be called base material. And after this comes in, the other thing we're going to do is, I'm just thinking, okay, so this is going to come in. Now our opacity, yeah, okay, cool. Just thinking about it. So that's going to come in, and we're going to need to do a material layer blend. So I'm going to run this into matte layer blend. Now there's a really useful function that's already just floating around called matte layer blend separate normal and color clamps. We're going to go with that one. This is a material layer blend that just straight up blends your every single parameter within a material layer, which is really nice. So I'm going to get that, and that's actually going to go into our output. So in theory, this is going to be our base, and this is going to be our top. Now, for the sake of getting this together, initially, I'm just going to put in some other dummy values, and then we'll replace this with our material layer down the track. But for the time being, hold down 1 and left click, and I'm going to set this base color to be 1, so we can see it nice and shiny. I'm going to set the roughness to 0, despite the fact that snow is actually going to sit around a 0.5 to 1 roughness value. I'm just going to make it 0 for the time being. And I'm going to then also, I'm going to set opacity here to 0.5. Cool. So I'm going to run U into top material, and here we can see that is now displaying the top one. And if something were to trigger the alpha to be a 1, it would display the bottom one. And I'll just demonstrate that. So if that was a 1, it would be the pseudo snow. If it was a 0, it would be what's going to be the base material. Cool. But this is quite clearly not what we want to have plugged into our alpha. So let's get going on that. What we need to do is we need to assess a few things whenever we're doing the blend. The blend is going to, first off, it's going to check whether the surface is facing up or down, because that's really important. And the other thing it's going to do is it's going to take into account the height loops. Now usually we could go into some nice complicated node networks to do the height loops, but because someone's already done that for us, I'm going to just grab that. So there's a material function that's floating around called height loop with 2 height maps. We're going to get that. And now this is going to be, I'm going to move these guys back because they're going to get in the way very quickly. And I'm going to move you upwards for the same reasons. Cool. So height loop with 2 height maps typically it's typically used to blend 2 colors together. So you've got diffuse 1 takes in a vector 3, diffuse 2 takes in a vector 3. But we don't actually want to do that. We really just want to blend, get an alpha output, which is a mask output. So we can plug this into here. And now the only parameters here that it really cares about are the transition phase, the height texture, and in theory the contrast, but really not going to bother with that, to be honest. Default contrast is pretty good for this stuff. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to plug in a function input to the height texture 1. So height texture 1 represents the height texture of the base material. So I'm going to call this function input, and this is going to be called base height, and take in a scalar. Actually, now that I think about it, you probably want your default height to be 0, not 1. Yeah, whoops. Okay, so height texture is plugged in, and the other thing that we need to take into account is that this is something that you're only going to periodically want to change around. I mean, most of the time you're going to have a height map that you can read in, but if you don't, we still want the function to work. So I'm going to tick this little box that says use preview as default. Now the next thing for us to take into account is the snow's height output. Now for the time being, I'm going to eventually, when I make the material layer for snow, it's going to actually have a nice little output that is going to plug in to here with the actual values. So for the time being, I'm actually just going to plug in height texture as 0.5, just so we've got something in there. That's going to get replaced, so stop stressing. Okay, next up, and this is the important part, we're going to start looking at what's called the transition phase, which is, this is the thing that tells the lerp how far into the transition it's actually meant to be. So the transition phase lerp is going to take into account the snow cover amount. It's going to take into account whether the entire object should be covered in snow or just the top. And it's going to take into account... No, actually that's about it. So to begin with, let's start getting the transition phase together and just use and get the directional stuff working. So to do that, I'm going to add vertex normal world space, which is this little node. If I preview this node, you can see what it's doing. This basically gives us the axes that the surface is currently pointing in, like the actual normal, which is fantastic, because if we get this, and I type in dot product, and we get the dot product with I'm going to hold down 3 and left click to add a vector. If we get the dot product and set the B channel to 1, so the best way to understand how red, green, and blue work with world axes is if you look down here, you can see that the Z is blue, the X is R, the Y is green, and when Z is going upwards, it means that Z is 1. So whenever the axes of the vertex normal and the dot product of a vector that is just pointing upwards, you'll see that what we end up with is this, which is really, really, really useful. This actually gives us the information of what's facing up. So with that, we're then going to do one other thing, which is very important here, an easy thing to miss, and that's actually to clamp it. And the reason we clamp it, you're not going to see a difference, but what happens is with the dot product, this value here is 0, but the value on the bottom of the sphere is actually -1. We can't see -1 because -1 is black, but once you start doing calculations that involve working out how these things should work together, your negative Z axis is going to start wreaking havoc. So it's a better idea to just clamp it now and get it out of your system. Okay, so the next thing we're going to do is really straightforward. We're going to add a linear interpolate. So to do that, I held down L and I left clicked. Sorry, I used some shortcuts here to blaze through. And what we're going to do is this lerp is going to be used to control whether we want the object to use the top or whether we want the entire object to be covered in snow. So how that's actually going to work is we're going to create a value called world normal influence, and when world normal influence is equal to 0, it means it doesn't care about the normal of the world. So it doesn't actually care what's facing up on this particular object. But whenever world normal influence is 1, we're going to want it to use this information here. So how that's going to work is pretty straightforward. I'm actually going to duplicate this one. So click on it, Control W, and I'm going to set the value. I'm going to set the input name to be world normal influence, and the default value here is actually going to be 1. Again, I'm using preview as default. So what's going to happen is I'm also going to duplicate the clamp. Again, Control W for duplicate. So that's going to plug into there, and this is going to plug into the B channel, because when it's 1 we want it to be equal to that. Actually, I'm going to move these to here so it's less in the way. Sorry, I know I'm clicking around a lot, and with these types of things I know you're going to be scrubbing back and forth, cursing me out, but you're going to have to get used to it. So the A channel is the last thing I have to really take care of here, and I'm going to hold down 1 and left click, and I'm going to set this value to be 1. You can actually set this in the lerp itself, but really tied into how this used to work with UE3. So create your habit. So with that plugged in, what you'll see is if I preview this lerp, the default value here means that white on top, black on the bottom. However, if someone was to ever change this value to 0, the entire sphere is now white. You got the top half, you got the whole thing. You got the top half, cool. So next up, we're going to now be just adding in the actual information that reads from whether the snow cover is there in the world's parameter collection, or world collection parameter, I mean. And to do that, I'm going to type in the word param, and the first one that comes up is collection parameter. I'm going to click on that, and I'm going to go collection, and I'm going to add terrain setup, which is that thing we created earlier. I'm then going to change this to be parameter name is snow amount. And all I need to do is multiply this against my snow amount. If I preview that, I'm going to get that multiplied against my snow amount, and I'm going to then plug that into my transition phase. Okay. Now I know I did a whole bunch of things really quickly then, but what's cool about that is, I'm just going to again try and clean this up somewhat. I'm going to go and click on output result. I'm going to go start previewing. And as you can see, we have this. And if I were to go to my terrain setup, put it on this half of the screen, if the snow amount was equal to 0, it does that. If the snow amount were equal to 1, it does that. Now for all those playing at home, you can see that I have one final mistake here that I really need to actually account for. Yep, my thing is backwards. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to go alpha, I'm going to do a 1 minus, I'm going to plug that in. And now if we were to look at the same thing, when this is here, when there's no snow, there's a little bit of snow, bit more, bit more, bit more. Oh god, snow is everywhere. So you can see how that kind of creeps in. And I can also grab this and drag it, and you can see the snow kind of pulls itself out, which is great. Cool, so that is the brunt of this cover in snow material function. Next up, we're going to be focusing on how to actually create the material layer for snow and incorporate that. So with our cover in snow material started to be put together, we're next going to be looking at the actual the snow material layer. So to do this, I'm going to right click and I'm going to go materials, material function, and this is going to be called ml_snow. So ml_snow, I'm going to open up. And we're going to start putting this together. This is going to be a little bit complicated in some areas because I want it to look good. So yeah, if this takes a couple of passes to go through, you have my apologies. Okay, so to begin with, what we're going to start doing is we're going to look at how we want the snow to really turn out. Now, the important thing for this type of stuff to look good is that when you're up close, you can see the little details, and when you're far away, it doesn't look like a tiling texture. So the best way for us to actually do that is to make two materials. One material is what we see when we're far away, and one is when we're up close, or at least two sets of textures that are different UV sets, and then we kind of blend between them as you get closer. So the very first thing that we're going to do here is output result is going to be called snow material, and I'm going to drag off that, and I'm going to do a make material attributes. Okay, so this now looks like one of your classic things that you plug in as if it was a standard material. So with that done, we're going to start going through this and see how this goes. Okay, so the first thing that I really want to do is get the blend set up, the distance blend. So I'm going to click and do an absolute, what do they call it? World position. If I can find the thing. Looking for a world position. There it is. And that's going to add an absolute world position. We want this to include material offsets. Now what this node does is it gives us an actual location of the pixel that we're seeing in the world. So if I get this and I was to also add camera position, you can see that there's a cool little node here called camera position world space. Now, if I get these two and I do the distance, this now tells me how far that pixel is from the camera. Now, if I get this and I go and divide by an arbitrary number, I'm going to divide this just as an example by 1024. What we actually see here is, if I preview this node, is when I get close, it's black, or close to black. And as I move further away, once I'm 1024 units away, it's pure white. So this actually is going to control our blending between two different things. I'm also going to clamp it because we don't want to have it twice as bright when I'm 20 meters away. So now you can see that no matter how far away, it's just white. Whereas if I was to preview this one and I move this far away, it's super bright. We don't want that. Cool. So with that in mind, we're going to start going through and adding the rest of the stuff. What I'm going to do is we're going to add a function input called macro snow tiling. Now, how I want you to think about this is the macro, anything with the word macro in it means what we're seeing when we're far away, and anything that it has micro in it is going to be stuff that's close up. Okay, so this number of 1024, I'm actually going to plug in a preview value of 1024. I'm going to set this to be a scalar, and I'm going to plug you in. So that is now reading off of this value, which is good. Use preview as default is also pretty important here. So with that blend in place, what I'm going to go ahead and do is, I'm just thinking how I want to work the rest of this. What I'm going to go ahead and do is set up my texture sets. Now, because I'm just using base shooter game assets, we're kind of going to just work with what we've got, if you know what I mean. So the first thing I want you to do here is to add a texture sample. I'm going to hold down T and left click. And this texture sample, I want you to click here and type in the word cloud. And we're going to add T underscore clouds underscore 01. Not cloud 1, clouds 1. If you click cloud 1, you're going to have a bad time. Now this is going to be my snow. Now one thing that's really important here is that if we ever get two assets and we put them next to each other, we want those assets to look like it's got the same bumps of snow that are kind of covering both things. So the best way for us to do that is to, instead of using what's called UV space, we want to actually do it in world space. So the nicest way for us to go about doing that is, actually I might give you a quick lesson on how this stuff works really quickly. So if I get a texture coordinate and I were to preview it, and I'm going to preview it on a square, you'll see that the red values go from we've got 1 to 0, and over here we've got the green values, so R channel and G channel, or X and Y, goes from 1 to 0 along here, right? You can see they actually follow the axes on this. And what we're actually going to do is, instead of using those numbers that go between 0 and 1, we're going to get world position values, divide them by a number to figure out a scale, and then we're going to tile them according to that. Now, this is going to make more sense in just a second. So to do this, all we have to do is we're going to get the world position, and I'm going to get the red and green channels, so I'm going to grab a component mask. Now I'm only going to grab the red and green channels because if you think about it this way, is red and green mean the forward and backwards, left and right. It means that we don't care about what's up. So we're projecting world space from a top-down viewpoint. Now if I get that and then I divide it by a number, so this is the point where we then create a, this before was macro tiling. I'm actually going to go ahead and create a micro tiling now. If we get this value and I change it to, I'm going to get this, I'm going to duplicate it, plug that in. Now I'm going to rename this to be micro snow tiling. This value by default is going to be, let's say we want 400. So this means every 4 meters we get a tiling. I'm going to get that, and if I were to preview this, you'll see that we're starting to get something that looked like before, but now it's actually projected only along one axis. So a good way to kind of preview this is if I was to look at the preview node, if I was to get this, and that's how it normally is, but I was to plug this in as my UVs, you can see that X and Y, it's just following this, and Z, it no longer follows the UV space, it's actually projecting this pixel down. So this thing that we're doing only really works in the situation that we're using it, where we account for the space being only on the tops of surfaces. So that is a drawback to what we're doing, but there are plenty of ways around it. I'm not going to go into them here. Before I go on though, one last thing I really want to do is I'm going to add a bump offset to this up close one. And I'm just going to set the, I'm going to plug this into the UVs, and the height value I'm going to set to, let's go to 0.2, just an arbitrary number. Now when we put this in there eventually, it's going to look like it's kind of pillared up in theory. So we've got this happening as our minor texture, and what we actually want to do here is basically the same thing. I'm going to get my clouds, I'm going to duplicate it, and I'm going to use this absolute world position, but instead of dividing it by micro snow tiling, I'm going to divide it by macro snow tiling. So I'm going to click U, bring you down to here, so duplicate, Control W. I know I sound like a broken record, but it's the only way you're going to remember. I'm going to get this and then plug that into my UVs, and this time if I was to preview this node instead, start previewing, you'll see that it's much bigger. And more importantly, and this is where the magic comes, if I was to get a lerp, I held down L to click it. If I was to get a lerp and plug that into here, and plug this into here, and then finally plugged in the thing that I'm using to blend them into here, I should see what happens as I move away. And as I move closer, I'm previewing the wrong thing. Start preview, there we go. Now it may be hard to see, but as I zoom in and out, it's actually switching between the two textures. So when I'm at 10 meters away, it's something that's going to be tiling a heap. When I'm up close, it's going to be something, I got that backwards. When I'm far away, it's not going to be tiling so much. When I'm up close, it's tiling more, but people won't notice because it's up close and in their face. So that's a really useful little technique. And now we're essentially going to do the same thing, but with a normal map. And the normal map is going to control the actual bumps in the snow as well. So to do that, I'm going to use the same blend that we had down here, but this time I'm going to add some new texture samples. So I'm going to hold down T again, And this is going to be called, there's a nice distortion normal map. There's no real way to do what we're about to do cleanly. Sorry. So A and B. Now the top one is going to be plugged into. This coordinate. Bottom one is going to be. Oops. That's a good trick. Bottom one is going to be plugged into this coordinate. And once again, we're going to do a lerp that is going to blend between A and B, and that is going to follow this. Just as a quick demo, I'm going to plug this into there. And this into here. Oops. Click save. Don't forget to save all the stuff pretty regularly, because it's just one of those things that's likely to screw up. So if I was to look here, we've now got some bumps going on, and then as I move away, it actually blends into a different snow. So this is a really nice beginning. And now that we've got those basics in place, we're going to start focusing on how to actually get this looking slightly more like snow, as well as adding basic sparkles and subsurface scattering. Okay, so the next thing we're going to do is, if we were to look at this base color, kind of goes between like a really dark and a light. I'm actually going to be a little bit cheeky here and plug that into an alpha of a lerp, which is going to say that whenever you are meant to be particularly, I'm going to preview it. Oh, whoops, of course. Sorry, you can't lerp this into this because technically this is RGB and this is looking for only one channel. So to do that, all I have to do is run this component mask, uncheck the green channel, just run the red into the alpha. And I'm just going to tell this that whenever it comes around, the darkest value to ever be is going to be between like 0. I'm going to go 0.5. And then I'm going to plug this into a power, which is a quick thing. Now, power is going to give us a bit of contrast back, so I'm going to plug you into 0.7. And then my power is going to be oops, doing 0. Makes it a little bit nicer to me. So I've got that plugged in, and the final thing we really want to do is I'm going to get U, and I'm going to say multiply U against, typing collection, and I'm going to multiply it against that snow color node that we added ages ago. And if I plug U in, I preview U, it's actually going to be slightly blue. Now, one thing that's worth doing here is technically that's a float 4, so I'm going to go, it's not a problem yet, but every now and then it freaks out. So I'm going to plug in a component mask and set the B channel to be true, so it's red, green, and blue. I'm going to get you and plug you into base color. And that's pretty much that section done. So now I'm able to preview the node. We've got this all together. The next thing I'm going to want to do though is I'm going to just thinking of the best way for us to handle this. The roughness. So the roughness is essentially going to be pulled from roughness is going to be essentially pulled from our color, where it's going to say that the darker it is, when it's dark, it's going to be one level of roughness, and when it's white, it's going to be another level of roughness. You probably want to have it so that when it's dark, it's going to be a roughness value of about 0.5, and when it's white, it's a roughness value of about 1. You might want it shinier, but that's just a good gut feeling for the time being. So what I'm going to do here then is I'm going to go and off of this, actually I'll grab it off of my white one. Yeah, off of there, what I'm going to do is sorry, I'm just trying to find the best point for us to really do this. Yeah, okay, I'll just do it off this one. So I'm going to add a loop, and I'm going to plug this into the alpha, and this is going to go between a value of 0.5 and 1. And now I'm going to plug this into my roughness value, and what you'll see here is it's not very shiny, but that's kind of the point, is we want the sparkles in the snow to be shiny, but we don't really want the rest of the snow to be shiny. We'll do the sparkles in a bit. Now, with that in mind, we're going to go through and tweak this later. But with those values there, what I'm going to do next is start handling the sparkles. So, Shooter Game has a nice little texture for this. Hold down T and left click and it'll add a texture sample. This time I'm going to do a search for the word sparks. And you'll see one called sparks_01. And I'm going to quickly go back here and just grab this, and this. Now we've got the world position, the masking, and it's looking for a divide. Off the top of my head, I'm going to just divide it by 20. This is one of those things that we're probably not really going to want to change, so I'm not really going to stress about it just yet. Now what I'm going to do with the sparks is really simple. This is how these sparks look, so you can see that they're like that right now. If I was to get these and multiply them against just after the blend, so this, just to preview that, we now see that the sparks are in some spots and not in others. What I'm going to do next is I'm going to multiply that by, it's the nicest way for us to really handle this. Next up, I'm going to want to multiply that against a, we actually want this to almost be patchier than what we're seeing right now. So perhaps instead of plugging into there, I'm actually going to add a power node. I'm going to duplicate this one. So I'm going to multiply, I'm going to multiply this against the power node. And now you'll notice that as I turn this power node up, we kind of end up with the far more sporadic. So with that going on, the final thing that we need to do is, if you imagine that the white is where all the sparkles are right now, if you think about it, we actually want the sparkles to be black because it sparkles where there's no roughness, if you get what I mean. So the nicest way for us to do this is we get the existing roughness, which is this, and what I do is I subtract this, and if I plug that into the roughness, it's not quite as prominent as I was hoping it would be. So what I'm going to do here is cheat a little bit. I'm going to plug a multiply into this one that's going to be used to enhance it, and I'm going to, maybe that was too high. That's my roughness map. I'm going to hit stop. And I'm going to preview here. There we go. That's why I wasn't seeing it. And now if I shine a light over it, you're going to occasionally see Not sure how well it's going to come out in the monitor, but we're going to start seeing sparkles at some point. Maybe I will turn it up to like 50 and see. Yeah, okay, 50 works reasonably well. I'll fix these up a bit once we get it into the world and I can kind of start tweaking parameters. So we've got sparkles, we've got a rough normal in there, and the next thing that we're really just going to want to do here is add some subsurface so that as you look at it, it kind of has that kind of deep blue around it, as you see. So I'll show you how to do that now. So this is going to take a little bit of time, but hopefully it comes out all right. I'm going to right click and I'm going to go texture, world aligned. There it is. So this is a really useful useful material function. It's called world aligned texture. It gets a texture and projects it along the XY the XY, the XZ, and the YZ to combine them into an XYZ projected world texture, which is similar to what we had before, but imagine instead of stretching along these edges like we're doing at the moment, it actually goes ahead and just blends them with the correct projection. It's really nice. So what we're going to do is I'm going to right click and I'm going to do add a texture object. I don't want it to be distortion. I want this to be smoke. If I remember right, yeah, T-soft smoke is pretty good. So I'm going to drag you in. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to get the output of this. I'm going to make this to the power of 0.4. If I start previewing that, we now end up with this. And as you can see, this, if I put it onto a cube, if I put it onto a sphere, it's always nice. And I'm going to use this to be the lerp between, so that's the alpha, between two things to create a section of the subsurface. This is all going to seem kind of like voodoo until I get it together, so I do apologize for that. What I'm going to do is the darkest area of this I want to be blue, but kind of like a light blue. So hold down 3 and left click and you'll add a vector. I'm going to plug that into the A channel. I'm going to set this to be 0.5, 0.6, 0.8, which should give us a soft blue. Now I'm pulling this exact technique here actually from one of Epic's demos, the elemental demo. So if anyone's ever ripped that apart, you might see that there. I know, shameless. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to start previewing. Now at the moment it's being multiplied by 0, which isn't what we obviously want. What we do want is, I'm going to go up here and I'm going to add, remember that pixel normal world space that we had before? I'm going to get that and plug that into a Fresnel. And the Fresnel is going to have the normal channel plugged in. By default, it'll plug into the exponent in just to screw up your day. So that's plugged into the alpha. And what I'm going to do is, once again, this is going to be blue, but this time instead of being the 0 channel, with the A, it's going to be in the B. And this blue is going to be slightly brighter. This is going to be 0.8, 0.9, and 1. It's plugged into the B channel. I'm going to multiply these two things against one another. And now you see that we get this. I know, you're all impressed. So out of this multiply, I'm going to throw in another multiply, which is just going to be used to kind of get the color that I actually want it to be here. I'm going to add a 3 vector. So this is multiplying both of them, whereas those were just multiplying their respective ones. Now this is going to be multiplied against let's go 1.2, 1.4, and 1.6. So it's actually bright. Yeah, that's nice. I'm going to get this, and I'm going to run that into subsurface color. So subsurface color. Now, one thing to be wary of is that you're not really going to be able to preview this in the material layer. It's a weird drawback in Unreal that you can't actually preview this channel by default. It kind of assumes that it's opaque, as far as I'm aware. So you're just going to have to trust me that that's going to look good when we plug it in. Okay, so with all that in mind, the last thing that I'm really going to want to do is, at the moment this output's a snow material. That's basically going to be our material. However, the last thing I still need to do is we actually want to output the height as well. So I'm going to duplicate this and I'm going to call this height output, because I'm inventive like that. Set the priority to 1 so that they're always stacked in a certain way. And what we're going to do is, if you were to look at, okay, so if you were to look at the snow when it's like this, I'm going to drag off of the lerp. So this is the lerp that connects the two texture samples. I'm going to drag off that to here, and I'm going to do power of, I'm just going to preview it. I really just kind of want to turn this into something that looks more like a height map. So maybe 1.5. 1.5 looks all right. I'm going to connect you to the height output, and I'm going to save it. So with that done, what I'm going to do is go back to our covering snow. And instead of plugging in this blank material, I'm going to delete it. And if you drag your material layer snow into the scene, you're now going to end up with this as a cool little node. What I'm going to do is I'm going to plug snow material into top material, and height output is going to be plugged into, by default, is going to be plugged into height texture 2. And we're not seeing anything right now, and the reason we're not seeing anything is that I've left snow cover set to 0. So this is our base material. If I was to increase snow, do you see that coming in now? Notice how nicely that just goes ahead and covers the surface. Looks good. And that's the intro to getting that together. And now, our part's over for the most part. What we're actually going to do is, I'm going to go into high rise, and let's look at a material. So you see these cracks in the floor? Let's do this first because it's obvious. This is metal tiled. Actually, it was metal tiled gray, I think. Yeah, metal tiled gray. So I'm going to open up metal tiled, and by default, this is the material. Okay. Now, actually, one thing I'm going to do really quickly is I'm going to go back to my cover in snow, and see this thing here that says expose to library. I'm going to check that, and I'm going to save. And what happens now is if I was to go to here and right click and say cover in snow, cover in snow is now just going to appear, which is great. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to get this metal tiled, and I'm going to plug in my snow material to kind of work with it. To do that, what I'm going to need to do is this metal tiled gray is now going to have to actually become a node. So I'm going to right click here, I'm going to type in make material attributes. You'll notice that this is this. Now if I get this and I plug the thing that's currently into base color into my new base color, the thing that's currently in roughness into my new roughness, normal into my new normal. So if I was to get those, and then I was to click on the background, you'll see that there's this nice little thing here that says use material attributes. If I click that, it actually collapses this into a single node. So this is now looking for this type of input. But what we're going to do is I'm going to go this into base material and this into the result. Now if I hit apply and we look in the world, you know what we're going to see? There's my snow, but more importantly, if I was to get my material function, terrain setup. So if I was to get my material function and do this, you can see that that material now allows for snow cover. So that's a good start, right? Now you see a couple of things that it's not doing right now. The biggest one is that this isn't really accounting for, first off is the snow is different between when I'm zoomed out and when I zoom in. See those patches change their location, and I don't like that. So we're going to fix that up in just a second. The other thing you'll notice is that this isn't taking into account the cracks, which was a big deal I made before. So first off, we're going to take into account the cracks. And to do that, what we need to do is in this material, we basically just need to find whichever texture seems like it would be giving us the most, for lack of a better word, crack-like material. So that appears, if I look over here, to be the green channel of this. So if I was to get the green channel and plug that into base height, and I hit apply. If we were to go back in here and look at this render, you'll now see that terrain setup, as the snow comes in, see how that starts to fill up the cracks first before it actually fills up the rest of it. Which is good, slightly more realistic. It's up to you as to whether you want to add some more grunge into that and whatnot. The other important detail that is that we're missing is this doesn't have the subsurface scattering in it at the moment. So to do that, what we need to do is over here, I go to shading model, and I'm going to set this to be subsurface. And I'm going to hit apply. And this is quite clearly not working fully. You can see that the blue is actually making its way in, but awkwardly enough, what isn't making its way in is the default subsurface. So what we have to do to fix that is we're going to go to our cover in snow material. And on our cover in snow material, what we're going to do is add a, I'm going to drag off of the base material, and I'm going to do a override subsurface. So this is going to override the default subsurface color, and I'm going to make the new subsurface color 0. So this means that the base material has no subsurface, whereas the top material is going to have it. Now, I'm actually missing something else. If I go to ML Snow, I'm missing an opacity value for this, so I'm going to add in an opacity of like 0.25, just as a gut feeling. If I see how this looks now. Oops, I'm just making sure all of these are compiled. Cool. Okay, that's a bit nicer. You can see my little sparkles coming in there. That might be a bit too prominent. We'll fix that up later. So that's a start. The next thing we need to do is, we kind of always want the distant snow to be white. We don't want it to ever be disappearing and reappearing. So I'm going to fix that up really quickly. I'm going to go back into my material layer snow, and essentially my macro snow, this texture here, instead of plugging straight into the lerp, I'm going to add another one. It's going to plug into the, I'm going to go the red channel, oops, I'm going to go the red channel into an alpha, and that into the B channel. And instead of this being a value of 0 and 1, I'm going to set this to be a value of like 0.5 and 1. It's less obvious, but we probably actually still want to turn that up. So now I'm going to go 0.7 maybe. So that kind of works, but it's still fading out a bit more than I'd like. So there's a couple of ways that we can go about doing that. The cleanest way that I can think of is how many things are plugged into this lab right now? It's just one? Okay. So yeah, there's a couple ways you could do it. I mean, like, my suggestion would be finding some nicer tile settings. Also finding a texture that's not actually clouds. That helps. And the final thing would be, I mean, you could actually add this value multiplied by the distance fade to this value, so that it kind of just adds a little bit of bump as it gets there. But I'm not sure how much we really need to care about that at the moment. So yeah, I'm just going to add to a couple more materials so you can see how it works. I'm going to go here and I'm going to add metal tiled darker inherits from metal tiled, so I'm going to add it to metal tiled. So again, the process of adding snow is now snow cover. I add that. I add a make material attributes. I plug in all of the existing stuff. I then change this over to use material attributes. I plug U in, plug U in. That now has snow on top. And the final thing that I do to get this working nicely is I look for something in this that's really going to work okay as a height map. And in this case, I guess the nicest thing is really just going to be that concrete over here that they're using. So I'm going to grab these two concretes, which it currently looks like this. If I was to come out of this and plug that into base height for this particular material, hit apply. You'll now see that that nicely covers itself in snow, and because it's got the concrete stuff, it fills in those gaps first. That is now the brunt of what we've got. Okay, final thing I'm going to do is add that same lip to make that less ugly. I said it wouldn't get to me, but it really is. So I can get this same lip here. And I'm going to say that when the snow's up close, maybe like a 0.8. It's a little bit nicer. So you've got this. You can do the same with your grass. You can do the same thing with whatever. Another final thing that I'm just going to recommend doing as well is, if you wanted to, you could also get this material and add, at the moment the output here is just the blended material, but if I duplicated this, I could also output the height blend. So if this 1 minus now plugged into height blend, this could be used, for instance, if you wanted to add the node, but you're adding it to glass and you don't want to cover it in snow, but instead you wanted the glass to like freeze over as you went along. So this node here would now be really useful to just have. It's just one of those things that would be just floating around. So I'd recommend adding that as a final little touch. And so yeah, there you have it. We now have a setup that's controlled by world material parameters that allows you to fade snow out, slowly cut it in. And as we drag it up, you can see it's kind of creeping through, thus allowing you to celebrate Christmas away from your family in Unreal Shooting Game. So if you like what we've done here, I'm going to be turning out a lot more tutorials from here on in. We now have a Patreon account set up, and basically no matter what, I'm going to turn out freebies, but if you want the source materials, that's a good way to get them. It's also a good way to kind of prod me into doing more of these. So yeah, look, I really hope you like this, hope you learned something out of it, and I'll catch you next time.